Today we have one of those rare classic songs that has a multitude of stories and legends behind it. Very rare. First of all, it's the mother of all misheard lyrics. Truly. One that the singer-guitarist himself started doing in his live shows as a joke. It's pretty funny. And then there was the first draft of the thing, which was an epic 1,100 words that this legend had to pare down for radio. There was a whole lot of editing there. And then the guitarist risked being electrocuted to create this song. And then there was the origin of the song. Some say it was a lucid dream. Others say it was from a waitress stalker who kidnapped a customer. We're not really sure because the icon behind it passed away before we got the exact truth. And to top it all off, there was the sensitive icon who was behind it. This guy hated his own voice, especially on this song, but he was such a revelation that the Stones and the Beatles were at his very first gig. Let's get into a true classic. You're going to love this story coming up on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember the awkward days of summer camp in all its glory.
Hey, Andy, can I take out the motorboat and drive around the lake?
Sure. You're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. I know you're going to dig this channel. You'll find something here. Check out our interviews coming up. Very interesting story. It's pretty hard to believe, but completely true. Here goes. Although Jimi Hendrix was only 27 years old when he died on September 18, 1970, there are heaps of debunked urban myths about the legend that just won't go away. For example, given the nature of his death, there is the myth that he was an interminable junkie who was always high on some kind of paraphernalia. Truth is, though, near the time of his death, he actually curbed his drug use to make sure that he was not controlled by drug dependency. Another drug-related myth about Jimi Hendrix was that he used to rub acid into the fabric of his headband and cut his forehead so that the LSD would flow into his bloodstream whenever he wore said headband. There was no evidence that that ever happened. On the lighthearted side, though, for a long time it was believed that Jimi Hendrix was responsible for the proliferation of parakeets in the UK when he released his two pet parakeets named Adam and Eve in '68 as a symbol of peace. And that, too, was proven to be fiction. There are thousands of fans that maintain that his highly publicized death was not an accident, but it was actually a homicide. Yes, Jimi Hendrix remains a fascinating, somewhat mystical rock icon. Even the origin and meaning of his songs are the source of wild speculation. So on this episode, we're going to explore the provenance of one of Jimi's most famous tracks, Purple Haze. A strange but true story for a mystical song. Amidst many different accounts and theories about the inspiration behind Purple Haze, the genesis with the most credibility comes from Jimi Hendrix himself. When Jimi was asked how he came up with the lyrics for Purple Haze, he responded that imagination was the key to his expression. The rest was painted with a little science fiction, as it were. He started to write Purple Haze the day after Christmas, clear back in 1966. Jimi revealed that Purple Haze came to him in a Technicolor sci-fi dream where he was, walking underneath the sea, and he was suddenly engulfed in a thick haze of purple smoke. This obscured his vision and caused him to lose his way. Purple haze all around. Hendrix stated that he fell asleep while reading from Night of Light. This is a science fiction novel. And he started to dream about the purple haze. He believed his mind was already in a supernatural state when he fell asleep.
Purple haze, look!
Night of Light, that was authored by American novelist Philip Jose Farmer in 1957. At the time that Hendrix was reading the book, it was a fairly new publication. Released in the summer of '66. Night of Light is an elaborate thriller about a living goddess named Bunta who uses her power to pervade the planet Kareen, or Dante's Joy, with a solar phenomenon occurring every 7 years. Every 7 years, the planet is cloaked by a bizarre radiance that disrupts physical reality. Most of the inhabitants of the planet chose to take a special drug so that they could sleep through the phenomenon that causes a physical and mental upheaval. In what was considered a rite of passage in Farmer's novel, only mystics and devotees to the planet's strange religion can stay awake during the spectacle to experience a shocking brilliance where weird things materialize out of thin air. Those who survive are subjected to the whims of Bunta. Wow. The description of Night of Light alone could certainly stimulate some crazy dreams, especially if you were eating before you went to sleep, eating late. Like many of his compositions, Purple Haze was truncated from a sputtering of random thoughts, including the rhyming phrase, Purple Haze, Jesus Saves. Jimi dropped the Jesus Saves from the title because he felt it could be offensive to those who weren't believers. Jesus Saves was initially profound in the title because Hendrix believed that Purple Haze was symbolic for a spiritual or religious awakening that was extremely intense. Purple Haze was a vivid nightmare for Jimi, but in the end of the dream, Jesus saved him from being destroyed. Jimi disclosed that his original unedited version of the track had well over 1,000 words with like 10 verses, all centered around an aborted journey through a mystical place. He compared his writing to the war on Neptune, the Roman version of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Now, the first thought that Jimi scribbled down was the line Purple Haze, beyond insane. Is it pleasure or is it pain? He wrote about seeing his body painted blue and red, unborn fetuses, and 1,000 crosses. Words that were discarded as the song became, more purified and more focused. The most well-known lyric in the song that made the final cut is one that projects a powerful, bewildering image at a body image. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. It's understandable to think otherwise, but Jimi insisted that line was not drug-induced.
Excuse me while I kiss the sky.
And of course, it also happens to be one of the great misheard lyrics of all time. Excuse me while I kiss this guy. In addition to the Kiss the Sky chorus, fans have been hyper-focused on the meaning of the line, never happy or in misery, whatever is. That girl put a spell on me. Now that passage, heard in verse 3, paints a completely different picture of what Jimi described as Purple Haze. And it's the basis for another crazy theory about the conception of the song.
Whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me.
Now, in large part, the crafting of Purple Haze materialized during a media-hosted soiree that happened in East London at the Uppercut Club, managed by ex-professional boxer Billy Walker. Crammed in a claustrophobic green room, Jimi started playing the song's stirring guitar riff, and everyone within earshot snapped to attention immediately. The raw intensity of the riff, it propelled Jimi's then-manager Brian Chaz Chandler to shoot out of his seat and beg his client to turn that riff into a complete song. He instantly knew the riff could be transformed into a single for Jimi's Are You Experienced debut album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, a trio that Chandler assembled for Hendrix. Of course, Chandler recruited Mitch Mitchell to play drums and Noel Redding, who was not a bass player, to play bass. Chandler also convinced Jimi to change the spelling of his first name from the common Jimmy to a more exotic Jimi.
So, are you experienced?
So get this, one of the early Jimi Hendrix Experience concerts was at the Bag o' Nails nightclub in London, in front of a star-studded audience that included, of all people, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, Lennon and McCartney, Pete Townsend, Brian Jones, and Mick Jagger. Now, the set was only 15 minutes long, but the performance earned Jimi the nickname Mr. Phenomenon in the music publication Record Mirror. Imagine that. A rookie that was so phenomenal. Some of the biggest legends ever from the Beatles, The Who, and the Stones were in the audience as fans to experience it. This doesn't happen anymore. Now, Chaz Chandler worked closely with Jimi Hendrix over many iterations of Purple Haze until it was shaped into a 2-minute and 46-second adaptation. Long far cry from 1,000 words. Chandler, who actually passed away in '96 from an aortic aneurysm, he was a musician himself, most notably as the bassist for The Animals, where he delivered one of the most memorable bass lines ever for the intro of The Animals' 1965 hit, We Gotta Get Out of This Place. When When Chandler left the Animals, he became a talent scout. He was out there looking for the next big thing. I think he found it. At the behest of Keith Richards' girlfriend, Linda Keith, Chandler went to see Hendrix at the tiny Cafe Y in New York City's Greenwich Village. Jimi began to play the guitar with his teeth. Most people in the audience thought he was simply just a freak show. But what Chandler saw was a potential superstar, and he convinced Jimi to retain him as his manager and move to England to really immerse himself in London's swelling music scene. But the tricky part in the recording process was to make the song more palatable for radio, while not breaking Chandler's #1 studio rule. Chandler's rule was this: there are no rules. In the studio, Chandler's philosophy was to break away from recording parameters that stifle artistic greatness, such as you must record at a certain speed or you must clean up distortion. Conventional practices were not followed here, except that Chandler didn't allow outsiders in the studio. Several times, Hendrix invited girls to come hang out with him at the studio, but Chandler kicked them out. Purple Haze, it was an unorthodox recording by design, which was a quality that made it such a revolutionary track in the first place and suited Jimi's love for experimentation. The classic rock wonder, it opens with a chord of 2 riffs, then segues into a tritone, which many label as the most perfect, imperfect dissonance. In the studio, Hendrix and Chandler constantly experimented with methods that their peers thought were quite primitive. They employed some unusual improvisation to achieve a very unique sound for Purple Haze. Hendrix knew the imagery that he wanted to evoke with Purple Haze, exactly what he wanted. He wanted to somehow replicate that trippy dream that I've talked about, with some kind of psychedelic surrealism, so that the listener could relish what he had experienced. You can see it or feel it, but you're living outside of it, something that is distanced from reality. That effect was ingeniously created by positioning a pair of headphones around a live microphone that produced an echo to the background track. There was some cutting-edge technology in the recording of Purple Haze. Here's an example. For one of the guitar tracks, Jimi Hendrix used a fuzz pedal called an octavia. It's a device that raised a note 1 octave higher than the note Jimi was actually playing. Now, Hendrix, of course, was left-handed, so he would often restring his guitars and turn them upside down in order to play the instrument made for right-handed musicians. But it didn't prevent him from delivering his innovative guitar solos that he precisely memorized note for note. Now, since Jimi was not classically trained, he didn't know how to write music, but that was just a formality. He wrote a recording guide with copious notes on a large yellow legal pad for the production team and his bandmates to follow precisely. Jimi mapped out in great detail, I might add, where all the instrumental parts should be inserted. Drums go here, bass pattern there, those kind of instructions to the exactness. When the recording was sent to the record company for mastering, the tape was actually delivered with a clear warning on the label: deliberate distortion, do not correct. He had to do that back then. What you may not know is that Hendrix hated stepping out in front of a microphone to sing. He said it time and again, he thought he had the worst voice in the world. Now, he was supremely confident with his guitar playing, but he was so paranoid about his singing that engineer Eddie Kramer had to erect screens around Jimi's vocal mic. And he had to dim most of the lighting in the studio so that nobody could see him while he was singing his vocal parts.
And she said, I shall return tomorrow.
He's very paranoid about that. It's very interesting. Although many in Jimi's close circles near the end of his life were emphatic about his curtailed drug use, it was an undisputed fact that Jimi liberally indulged in hallucinogens throughout his short but impactful career. His drug consumption fueled another unsubstantiated rumor, but often told, that Purple Haze was inspired by a newspaper article that Hendrix could not get out of his head. It was an article fit for the tabloids about a waitress who had an unhealthy obsession with one of her regulars at the cafe she worked for. Apparently, it was reported that the waitress slipped some LSD into the customer's coffee and then led him dazed and confused to her apartment, where she held him captive for several days. Hendrix used the story to write lyrics to a song from a man's perspective about an inescapable female captor.
Whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me.
If that's true, the line, whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me, it's a logical example of art imitating life. Jimmy's help me plea that follows only reinforces the contention that Hendrix was definitely inspired by a newspaper article about the diabolical waitress. Makes for a good story, except that there's no evidence of such an article. But it's one of the most shared urban legends in the folklore of rock and roll. And it certainly could be true. I don't think people have done a lot of research. I should do more. When Jimmy died, though, the truth died with him. What really inspired Purple Haze? Again, he was only alive for a few years to tell those stories. That's why these interviews are so important. It's amazing how new facts about the most famous celebrities or rock stars or bands are uncovered just when you think you've heard everything there is to know about them. I mean, doesn't it seem like every other year someone discovers a never-heard-before track from the Beatles or an unreleased song from Elvis that was found on some studio outtake that was hidden in someone's basement? That's what's cool about it. It keeps the legend and the mystery of our heroes alive. Jimi Hendrix, he's no exception. I mean, we're going to keep hearing rumors and innuendos from fanatics that believe they've solved a mystery about Jimi Hendrix that no one else has been able to solve. It'd be very cool if a recording of the original 10-verse version of Purple Haze was ever found. Alas, nothing has surfaced. Yet. Of course, Purple Haze ranks as one of the most influential songs of the entire rock era, and Hendrix is such a fascinating person to study. His influence as an innovator, it's almost unparalleled. In the US, Purple Haze was more of a posthumous sensation. The brilliance of Jimi Hendrix, that was not fully realized until after his death. I mean, sure, it's one of the most played songs in classic rock history, but when Purple Haze was released as an international single in 1967, it stalled at number 65 on the Billboard Hot 100. However, in the UK, it was a massive hit, rose all the way to number 3. In fact, all of Jimmy's singles were bigger in the UK than they fared in the US, including All Along the Watchtower, arguably the most famous song by him, went to number 5 in the UK, and it didn't even chart here. The tipping point that made Jimi Hendrix a true star in America was when Jimmy doused his guitar with lighter fluid and set it on fire at the Monterey Pop Festival. Even though Hendrix was more popular in the UK at that time, than he was in the States, it was incredible that Purple Haze, a song that was about as unconventional as a pop single could be in the 60s, was such a huge mass appeal success in that country. When Purple Haze peaked at number 3 on the British singles chart in 1967, the 2 singles ahead of it were Something Stupid by Frank and Nancy Sinatra at number 2.
I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like I love you.
And there was Puppet on a String by Sandy Shaw that was at number 1. Purple Haze, it was the second to last number for the final performance of the Jimi Hendrix Experience at the Love and Peace Festival in Germany. It happened on September 6, 1970, 12 days before he was pronounced dead at St. Mary Abbott's Hospital in London after a lethal mix of sleeping pills and alcohol rendered him unconscious. At the risk of being electrocuted, Jimmy performed Purple Haze and the closing number, Voodoo Child's Slight Return, during a heavy rainstorm with gale force winds wreaking havoc across the stage. Jimi Hendrix was such a tour de force. His music and artistry has influenced virtually every genre of music, with interpretations of Purple Haze by Eric Clapton, The Cure, Lady Gaga, Tangerine Dream, Iggy Pop and the Stooges, Frank Zappa, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the Kronos Quartet. Among many, many others. Jimi Hendrix put a spell on the universe when Purple Haze was released in March of '67, no doubt. As an anthem of the counterculture, the song transcended the psychedelic 60s, if that were possible. It will continue to blow our minds. I mean, back when it was first released, today, tomorrow, whenever, to the end of time. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Jimi Hendrix and Purple Haze. What do you think about this song? What do you think is the truth about this song? I got to do some research on that article because I've read that 4 or 5 times, but some people haven't been able to find that article at all. And maybe, you know, in a different newspaper than they're looking for. Anyway, we'll have to do that. But if you like our content, we invite you to subscribe below. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.